online companies to ensure that awareness is raised so that that criminal activity it does not occur. To be honest, this is the first time I'm coming across this particular subject. Unless officials can add anything, I'd rather reserve my position and write to you in more detail about this specific issue. Yes, that would be helpful. I
just wanted to tell you about this, actually. I had a look on the website for Hampshire, which I believe is the county that your constituency is based in. Now, there were 297 prostitution adverts live on Viva Street yesterday. I had to look at about 150 of those, and at least half of them had adverts of different women being used, but using the same phone number or the same text. So that's a kind of red flag, they could be trafficked. And lots of adverts suggesting a woman was new in town or only here for a short period, which again fits with what we've heard about women being moved around the country by traffickers. So those adverts, I've actually now referred to Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary for them to have a look at this, because it seems to me there's some obvious red flags there. So I hear what you say about this is the first time that you've kind of become aware of this. I just wonder, though, just on your reflection of hearing that about in your own local area, do you think we need to do something about this? The government needs to do something about these websites?
Oh, it's totally unacceptable, of course.
Okay.
What I am encouraged by is that we do have new mechanisms in legislation to deal with the trafficking of vulnerable people, which includes exploitation, which includes and can include prostitution of the type that you're talking about. And there's a whole array of measures to support vulnerable victims as they go through a criminal investigation, special measures, witness anonymity, and obviously if it's support through the modern slavery framework that is required, that will be provided upon an assessment upon individual circumstances. But I think, this is in terms of that element, there is a large framework. It requires an effective police investigation.
Okay, so I just want to move on to the illegal migration bill, and particularly dealing with the example I've been setting out around women who've been trafficked into sexual exploitation. And I had a look at the Equalities Impact Assessment for the bill, and that concludes in the bill that there would be a disproportionate impact on women of the provisions that are going to be introduced. So I just want to drill down in this a little bit. If a woman who had been brought into the United Kingdom by a illegal route for sex trafficking, so if she came to the attention of the authorities, would she be subject to arrest and detention under the illegal migration bill?
Well, let me just make it for context. The vast majority of people coming on small boats are men, about 80%. So we are talking about a minority of people who are female, and then we also, I would say, are talking about an even smaller minority of women who are being trafficked on the boats. I'm not denying that it occurs, but it is a small fraction compared to the totality of the issue that our bill is designed to deal with.
But they're caught up in it, so would they be subject to arrest and detention?
Well, what I would say is that we take very seriously our commitments and our protections under the Modern Slavery Act. We want to ensure that the balance is struck. What we've seen, I've talked about it last time and in a follow-up letter, that modern slavery rules have been exploited and abused by people coming here illegally to gain time to stay in the UK. Our measures in the bill make it harder for people to game the modern slavery system. At the same time, our measures in the bill, I believe, strike the right balance and still enable us to protect the genuine victims of trafficking, such as the type that you mentioned, who are there who have been trafficked, who are
So will they be subject to arrest and detention?
Well, it would depend on the circumstances. I'm not going to give you a definitive answer without knowing the particular facts. So a woman who's irregularly,
illegally into the United Kingdom, who comes to the attention of the authorities, who's been brought in and trafficked for sexual exploitation, under the illegal migration bill, you're saying you're not sure whether they would be arrested and detained?
There is an exception. So we've got provisions in the IMB which deal with the situation I've just said. We've got to...
So all women who are in those circumstances, they wouldn't be subject to this provision of arrest and detention?
If I can finish the question, because it's a complicated issue, so I do need to get through the explanation. we've set out very targeted and deliberately drafted measures in the illegal migration bill. What we've done is we have allowed for the scenario where someone is claiming to be a victim of trafficking or modern slavery, and if they are part of a police investigation,
but
for example...
Say it's just come to the attention of the authorities, this woman has arrived irregularly or illegally into the United Kingdom and is being used for sex trafficking. And just leave aside the police investigation, what happens to this woman?
Well, that's a fundamental aspect of the issue you've just raised. This is a illegality we're talking about if someone's being trafficked for prostitution. Yeah. We believe that our measures strike the right balance of protecting those genuine victims. If they go to the police, if they're required by the police to be here and be part of a live investigation relating to the investigation of trafficking or modern slavery, then they could claim an exemption to the removal powers in the bill. So we have to also make sure that we are not allowing the continuation of the gaming of our rules, which is people claiming to be victims of modern slavery when they patently are not, as a way to thwart removal, as a way to thwart detention, and as a way to buy time in the United Kingdom.
I think the problem for the committee is that we've asked for evidence of this gaming of the system, and we've not received any of it. And in fact, we've had in front of us the former anti-slavery commissioner, who again says she's seen no evidence of this either. But just on this particular point...
That's not right, because you raised this point last time I came before the committee. I made the point then, I still maintain it, and I wrote to you with detailed examples subsequently setting out... no, not two actually. Several examples, and I can mention more examples now. Several examples of how modern slavery rules are being abused by people who are not genuine victims of modern slavery. We need to bring an end to that, and that's what this bill does.
We've seen a couple, four, I think my clerk reliably informs me, that you put in your letter. I just want to be clear though. So what you're saying to me is that this person, this woman, would be subject to arrest and detention, but she may be able to stop being removed from the country if she then participates in giving evidence and being part of a police investigation. I think that's what you're saying to me. So she would be arrested and detained in the first place. We are saying
that we take our commitments to modern slavery very seriously. We are not including blanket exclusions in our legislation.
So she would be arrested.
We have struck the right balance whereby genuine victims of modern slavery can still put in a claim, and if they are able to meet the thresholds that we've set in the bill, combined with thresholds that we are implementing at the moment in terms of objective and compelling evidence for their reasonable grounds claim, if they're part of a police investigation, we believe that will filter out the vexatious claims of modern slavery.
Okay, so she'd be subject to arrest and detention. She might be able to claim this exemption if she's helping the police. Will she be allowed to access the support via the national referral mechanism?
Potentially, yes. Absolutely. If she is eligible, if she meets the criteria that we've set, so she meets the thresholds that we've set in our reasonable grounds guidance, so objective and compelling evidence of being a victim of modern slavery. If there is there's a requirement by the police that she or he stay here to participate and enable investigation. And if there is she satisfies the criteria in modern slavery, then yes, she may well be entitled to the NRM and support under the modern slavery regime.
Right. I mean, it's quite clear, isn't it, that we know particularly victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation find it very difficult to come forward and explain what's happened to them. It takes them quite a long time to get confidence to do that. Can I just...
What I would also have to add here is that at the moment, because of the dramatic and exponential increase in the number of claims which are being put into our modern slavery system, the delay has become unacceptable. From what used to take 40 or 50 days to consider a reasonable grounds or conclusive grounds decision is now taking 500 days. That's because the system's been overwhelmed by a large number of meritless claims. These measures will actually free up our resources to better help those genuine victims of modern slavery more quickly.
Well, again, the Anti-Slavery Commissioner doesn't agree with that, and she says the fact that there are more people coming forward is because of better training and better spotting of people who might well have been trafficked. So that's why she says the number's gone up, and I think actually the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, also takes that view. Can I also just ask you, while we're on about this issue of the illegal migration bill, it's 100 days since that bill was introduced into the Commons. It's gone through all its common stages. It's now in the Lords, as you know. I think it's its final day for the committee stage in the Lords. Why have we still not got an economic impact assessment?
Well, we obviously have produced lots of documents surrounding the need for the bill. I need to set out the context. We've got a very urgent problem here relating to illegal migration. It's one of the Prime Minister's priorities and mine as well. 45,000 people travelling across the Channel illegally last year. We're spending £6 million a day on hotel accommodation, £3 billion a year. So doing nothing is not an option.
I would like you just to answer the question, because I know other members want to comment. So why have we not got the economic impact assessment?
Well, the reason
is a requirement really for members to know how much this bill is going to cost.
We will be publishing it in due course.
When does that mean? I mean, the bill will have finished all its stages and been given royal assent by the time we get this, won't it?
The issue is that there are many unknown factors relating to...
The factors of,
if I could finish a sentence, then we might be able to get somewhere.
I'm intrigued with what you're saying. There's many unknown factors of a bill that's 3/4 of its way through the House of Lords.
There are many unknown factors upon which the bill's success is contingent. I'm very happy to admit that. For example, the delivery of our Rwanda agreement. We're currently in litigation. And those timelines are out of our control. We need to conclude our litigation relating to our Rwanda agreement. Once we have a clear view of the operability of Rwanda confirmed by the courts, then we will be able to take a very firm view about the economic impact of this bill. But I would also say, to my mind, it's pretty obvious what the economic impact of the bill will be. We'll stop spending £3 billion a year on our asylum cost. We will stop. It's a bill which will lead to the cessation of 45,000 people in hotels and £6 million a day. And to my mind, those are savings which we cannot ignore.
Okay. Are you able to just to help us with what the financial assessment of detaining all those that will need to be detained in the bill? What's the cost of that? Because you're going to detain people for at least up to 28 days. So what's the cost of that bit?
Well, again, we are keeping that under review. I mean, again, that is an unknown. I cannot predict the number of people who are going to be arriving on any one day illegally. We have past experience, but we know that these numbers really vary. When the bill comes
What's your
into
best
force,
estimate?
when the bill comes into force, we will be able to take a view as to how quickly we're able to operationalise our detention powers, our relocation powers,
okay,
and
so
that will then inform the costs.
Okay. All right, thank you. Just moving on very quickly to the backlog. So as of the end of November last year, the asylum initial decision backlog was 131,292. That's what was published. On the 28th of May, it was 137,583. So I just want to be clear, has the asylum backlog increased or decreased under your watch?
The backlog of initial decisions, which predate the 28th of June 2022, the so-called legacy backlog, has decreased. As of December, when the Prime Minister stood up and set out our plan, that stood at just over 92,000. That has fallen by about 17,000 at most recent count. So the backlog to which the Prime Minister and myself have consistently been referring has fallen. Right. We also have inflowing cases, which post-date the 28th of June and run up to today.
Yeah.
It's absolutely impossible to ever get that number down to zero because there are constantly cases coming into the system.
Okay.
But I accept, of course, the numbers keep rising because the boats keep coming. And that is the flow of casework, and that is what we are also working on to reduce.
So I think 1,200 came over in small boats between Saturday and Monday alone, so that needs to be obviously added into your Your backlog. So just so I'm clear, on the backlogs, you've got your legacy backlog, which you say has gone down by 17,000. Then you've got your flow backlog, which is just going up and up. And then as of today, you've got more coming in. So you've got kind of 3 lots of backlogs that you're dealing with.
I mean, you can cut the cake in very many different ways.
Yeah.
You could say, I mean, it's very typical and proper to define a legacy backlog. That's when the NABA came into force, and it's right that the old rules applied up until then. There are some very long-standing cases in that backlog. It's right that we deal with that 92,000 strong caseload. Flow, you could go up until the 7th of March 2023, which is when we will backdate the implementation of our new measures in the illegal migration bill. And then you could do a post 7th of March caseload as well. So there are different ways of looking at it. But the Prime Minister and I have been consistent and clear all along that that pre-28th of June 22 backlog, so-called legacy initial decisions, has fallen because of interventions that we've put in place.
Right, so it just seems to me you've got a backlog of backlogs now. You're just building backlog upon backlog. That's the position you're in.
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say we've got a caseload of cases, and you have to define them in different ways. There are different rules which apply to different cases.
Well, we'll just disagree
there are
on
initial
that.
decisions, there are decisions which are being appealed, there's work in progress, there's business as usual. There are all types of decisions in the asylum caseload. It's not fair to say, you know, to count it all in a very simplistic form that you're suggesting.
Well, I think we're going to disagree on that because I think you have a backlog of backlogs now. Can I just finally deal with caseworkers? So you very kindly wrote to me last night, and you set out in your letter about the Prime Minister's promise that you would have 2,500 caseworkers to deal with these backlogs. In that letter, you say as of the 1st of March, there were 1,281 caseworkers. You say also that the caseworker number will go up to 1,800 by the summer, and by September this year, it will be 2,500. So I just want to ask you how that's going, because we're now in June. So what's the latest figure in terms of caseworkers?
I'll turn to Dan, but my latest figure is that we have, let me just get to my numbers. So we've increased the decision makers, and my most recent figure is 1,281 full-time equivalent asylum decision makers.
So you have that
That's
in March.
48% more than July 2022, and we are aiming to get to 2,500 by September.
So, sorry, the 1st of March you were at 1,281, so you've not increased that since March?
No, that is the figure that we have, which is as of the March figure. Obviously, the recruitment is ongoing, and we have a number of mass campaigns that are running through the operations. We don't have the figure as at today.
You don't know today how many caseworkers you have, and this is one of the Prime Minister's top priorities, to clear the backlog.
We produce these figures on a regular basis. I'm very confident that that is the most recent figures. I have very regular intensive work programmes on this issue of caseworker recruitment. We're actually doing very well on meeting our target. I'm confident we're going to meet our target of 2,500 by September.
When does summer, what's the definition then of summer for getting to 1,800? In your letter you said by the summer you'll be at 1,800. And it's June the 14th today? It's summer?
I mean, I can write to you, if I can access that data of the absolutely up-to-date figure as of today. I'm not sure if we can identify that figure, but I'm happy to. I'm as I say, I look at this piece of work very, very closely with a very intensive work programme in the Home Office. And as I said, there's been a very proactive effort to recruit and onboard caseworkers, improve their productivity, train them up. And as I said, I'm confident that we're going to meet our target.
Okay, so you're going to get to 1,800 by the summer and 2,500 by September.
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Really? Goodness me. And can I just ask as well, are those figures gross or net figures that you've put in your letter?
They'll be full-time equivalent.
So they're full-time equivalent, and are they gross or net? Because we know when we had evidence, I think it was in 2021, that the attrition rate within this group of staff was at 47%. So what's the attrition rate?
it will be about, we will be talking about our total cohort.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just about people coming in. We've got to, it's only effective if we have bums on seats, so to speak, at the end of the day.
Okay.
So this is not just about a one-way recruitment drive. This is about what our total cohort comprises.
Because that's interesting. In your letter, you say you don't keep records of people leaving or retiring or moving on or getting promotions. So how do you know those figures are correct? It's in your letter last night.
Well, we know what our total workforce is.
Oh, do you? Because you say, we do not keep a central record of the number of asylum caseworkers who've left their role due to retirement, resignation, promotion or other causes. So you're saying to me these figures that you've put in your letter are net figures, but you don't actually have a central record to work out how many people have left?
Turned down.
So we do know that our attrition rate that you mentioned has dropped significantly, so it's down to around 28%.
28%?
And as the Home Secretary has said, the 2,500 is the aim to have number of caseworkers in post in September, and that is what we are working towards and the plans are delivering against.
And as I said, I think we've got a good track record. As of our most recent figure, we've already increased the number by about 48% compared to July 2022. So we're moving in the right direction.
But you'd missed your target in July 2022, if I remember, because you were supposed to get to 1,000, weren't you? And you missed that target. So it took you longer to get to over 1,000. I agree, it's good to see progress being made. But you've got a long way to go if you're going to get to 2,500 by September. And you've got an attrition rate of 28%. Those figures, to me, I have to say, we'll be interested to see the next figures being produced from the Home Office on this issue. Right, thank you. I'm going to move to Simon Fell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Home Secretary, for joining us. I'm going to ask you some exciting questions about fraud. Last time you were in front of us, you trailed the fact that the fraud strategy was about to be launched. Very glad to see it now out, and I think it's a good document. It brings together government and government focus, which I welcome as something of an aficionado of these reports over the years. But the thing that strikes me about it is the fact that despite the fact that 40% of crime in England and Wales is fraud, the single most common crime type around, the plan only proposes to reduce it by 10%. I wonder if you can share your thinking there.
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing your expertise to this issue. I think it's been an underexplored issue for some time, and that's why I'm very proud that as a government we were able to publish this long-awaited strategy. It is now a prevalent feature of modern-day crime and law enforcement, and what we do need is a step change in how our agencies respond to this very significant crime, which can be devastating. So I think that in terms of the fraud strategy, it includes over 50 actions. I think that's quite ambitious that we are working on. And I think that you say that it doesn't go far enough. I think the scale of the problem consists of over 40% of crime these days, and it's rising quickly. We do need to we've committed to cutting it. I think that is a big step forward. We've already, and we're building on progress that's been made so far. We've already blocked over 600 million scam texts from reaching the public. We have and this strategy will enable us to go further. We will, by banning cold calls on financial products, banning SIM farms, preventing criminals using mass texts even more, and taking down fraudulent websites. And I point you to the very good operation on iSpoof that the Met and other policing partners recently led, which led to a very wide-ranging takedown of one such website. So there's some work, but we've got to build on it. I think that the £100 million investment in law enforcement is a significant contribution to the strategy. And we need to go further, building on the measures in the online safety bill to ensure that people are better protected. Of notable significance, I think our National Fraud Squad sets a high level of ambition of 400 new specialists who are going to be working in this field, deploying those from the UK intelligence community to relentlessly pursue criminals who are operating in this way. So I think we've I would love to eradicate fraud and get it down to zero, but we've got to, this is the beginning. This is the beginning of the fight back against fraud, and I think we have to be ambitious and stretch ourselves, but also have an element of realism in terms of what we can technologically and operationally achieve.
Thank you. And I don't think anyone doubts the scale of the challenge here. It is huge. That 40% is there or thereabouts, 3.5 million crimes a year. And within that is probably significant underreporting. It doesn't include public sector fraud against DWP and other areas too. But if I take you back to that 10%, if 40% of crime was burglaries or muggings or anything else, then the headlines will be there. They will be very, very different. Everyone will be shouting about it, but yet for some reason we seem to be able to bear fraud, and I'm interested as to why you think a 10% reduction is sufficient as part of this strategy, especially given the fact we know that the people committing these frauds have often got very, very deep links into organised crime and criminality and are driving far worse stuff and using this to fuel that activity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair challenge. I mean, I believe, 10% will still numerically and in absolute terms mean hundreds of thousands of fewer victims of fraud, fewer offences, and I think that must be welcomed. We have ultimately a very complex challenge that many jurisdictions around the world, when I speak to my Five Eyes partners, online crime, cybercrime, fraudulent activity is often an area of common concern because it's so multifaceted in the way in the way these criminals operate, and then as a result what the protections and mitigations should be. You've got we need greater powers to pursue the fraudsters to ensure that criminals are behind bars. So that means better technological capability for our police, for our NCA, for our other services, so that they can detect and take action. We need to block it in the first place. I think that requires a degree of greater personal responsibility on the part of citizens to be more aware about the threats that we all face. The thing about fraud is there's no one type of victim. It can be your elderly lady. I'm sure we've all met someone in the constituency who's had her life savings robbed from her over the phone by a swindler, to a professional who works in the city, and they've been a victim of credit card fraud or identity fraud, and obviously I haven't even got to the broader white collar serious organised crime that we see, which can damage economies. So I think it's so varied. It requires a huge level of personal responsibility. We need to get the technological companies to play their part. That's why the Online Safety Bill is absolutely integral to this. And we need law enforcement and our policing community to be better equipped. So I think it is an incredibly challenging issue, and I think this is a very important first step.
Thank you. So you touched on tech companies, cyber-enabled. So 80% of fraud is cyber-enabled. And let's be honest, the majority of that sits on Meta's platform. The vast majority of it sits on Meta's platform. So 70% of the fraud which banks have to deal with comes direct from Facebook, Insta, other channels. Why aren't we pursuing a more stringent polluter pays principle, where those who are actually driving this are held responsible for it, whether financially or reputationally? Because let's be honest, that's what's going to drive these companies to change their behaviour and to clamp down on fraud on their platforms.
Well, the Online Safety Bill does contain some significant measures there. whereby there will be greater penalties and more incentive for those in the it will require the social media and the search engine giants to introduce measures to prevent fraud. We're also bringing forward the online advertising programme, which will tackle fraudulent ads across the UK-facing internet. And we've published charters with the banking, the accountancy and the telecom sectors that are already seeing results. And we hope to follow up with an online fraud charter very soon, which will address some of the detail to which you refer. But I think incentivisation is key. And we've got an excellent new anti-fraud champion, Anthony Brown MP, and he's going to be working with industry to ensure companies are adequately incentivised to tackle fraud. We have engagement with the big tech companies, and ultimately we need to ensure that the balance between law enforcement and access is struck between their need for end-to-end encryption. I believe the technology exists which enables both privacy and security concerns to be addressed, and we need to incentivise tech companies to embrace it.
Okay, thank you. And can I move you on to the PSR and the contingent reimbursement model?
Sorry, could you?
The PSR and the contingent reimbursement model. So the announcement of last week or the week before was that for the vast majority of people, if they fall victim to fraud through the banking system, they will get their money back through a slightly convoluted process, but a process nonetheless. Many people see that as a win. Are you not concerned that we are now in the position where we are coddling people to the point where they will not learn from their mistakes, they will not change their behaviour as a result of this? If you, this is a tried and tested analogy, but if you leave your front door open and you're burgled, your insurance company won't pay out. There's a reason for that. We are walking into an environment, are we not, where in an online space, people are not going to be concerned about the risks they're facing.
I think that's a really important point, and I'm passionate about increasing awareness. In a way, much like practice changed when it came to wearing a seatbelt, or as you say, putting CCTV up on your property. I think we need a step change when it comes to online activity. We are far more vulnerable than we appreciate, and I think people's lives are lived so prolifically online that they forget that there are fraudsters operating in that online world. And I think there needs to be a culture change and a greater level of awareness amongst individuals about how they can secure themselves properly online, whilst also buying their theatre tickets and booking their holidays. I don't think we have yet a sufficient level of personal responsibility. And when you talk about the payment systems, one of the challenges we have here in the UK is we've got a very effective payment systems mechanisms, very swift, and it's instant transactions that can enable fraudsters. And so I think injecting some level of check and balance in that system is something that the industry is open to, and something that might strike the right balance between enabling transactions electronically to happen effectively, to enable the wheels of commerce to roll, whilst also giving people a chance to think twice and to check whether that money should be leaving their account or whether they actually want to check the identity of the destination. So I think there are lots of complex things. We have, as I said, we can't do this alone from government. We do need the tech companies, we need the financial sector, and we also need society as a whole to have a cultural and step change in its attitude towards fraud.
I'm just concerned that we are sleepwalking into an environment where we are creating perverse incentive after perverse incentive, where the tech companies who are driving a lot of the fraud, which is hitting our constituents, which is hitting businesses, which is hitting government, are almost entirely off the hook for doing so. They're signing up to a voluntary charter, and this committee well knows, we've seen social media companies in front of us before talking about racism on their platforms. They don't adhere to their own terms and conditions. They don't monitor what goes on there. When we hold them to account, they don't act on it. So they are not being driven to change. The banks are, it's not often you'll hear someone defending the banks, but the banks are putting huge investment into their fraud systems. They are having to then pay out to customers whose frauds are enabled on those services. And consumers are not learning from their mistakes. Meanwhile, none of us are feeling the heat from it in anywhere near the degree we should be, because people aren't angry at us, they get their money back. And I don't see how this system improves when this is the situation. I suppose if I'm coming to a question at the end of this, it's can you convince me I'm wrong and that actually the system is going to improve with the model being as it is?
Well, as I said, I think it requires, I don't think it's all on the individual, nor do I think it's all on banks to compensate people who defrauded. I think there needs to be a greater level of protection and securing yourself online, a greater level of law enforcement tools which can be effectively deployed, and the right skills. There's a real need for upskilling in our law enforcement when it comes to online and fraudulent activity. And I think there does need to be a level of security that's provided by these large corporations, but not to a degree where it infantilizes individuals and people are robbed of the incentive and the need to be vigilant online. That would be the worst case scenario, I agree.
Thank you. And last question, Chair. So we went to visit the NCA a little while ago, and they're doing good work in this space. And I think you're absolutely right around the skilling piece. This is a real challenge. We need to make sure that we have the right people in the right jobs who understand this environment and can work in it. And that doesn't necessarily mean bobbies on the beat. It means people behind computer screens. But one of the challenges that they have is they are a civil service agency as opposed to a policing agency. So we've heard anecdotally and direct from them, they lose staff to the Met, they lose staff all over the place, and they struggle to recruit into positions because the pay structures are different. Given that this is such a priority, given it is 40% of the crime in England and Wales, do you have any appetite to look at changing the pay structure for the NCA?
Well, I'm definitely looking at how the NCA can better be equipped to deal with the online threat. I should say they've had some really good results, 290 arrests in a recent Operation Hen House and over £6.2 million of assets seized by the NCA in a fraud intensification period earlier this year. The Operation Cookie Monster was an NCA FBI operation where 24 UK cyber criminals and fraudsters selling stolen credentials on the dark web were arrested. As I said, I mentioned iSpoof was an international investigation targeting the iSpoof website, one of the biggest operations that we've seen, and of course Operation Elaborate, where the Met has taken down a website that used to make 10 million spoof calls between June 21 and June 22. So they've arrested 138 suspects. Hundreds of lines of inquiry are being pursued under that operation. So there is a huge amount of work going on. I've come in to the department. What I have noticed is that we need to emphasise fraud, but also the serious organised crime element underlying not just fraud and cybercrime, but many other crime types. And I'm working with the NCA to ensure that there is a greater focus on those crime types. That means enabling them to have the tools, the right powers, and the appropriate focus.
They'll be looking at those pay scales.
I'm not gonna confirm that at the moment.
Worth a try.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Carolyn Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Can I first go back to two questions actually the Chair asked, and the first one was around decision backlogs. You said on the 5th of June in the Chamber that the backlog was 17,000.
No, I didn't say it was 17,000. I said it's fallen by 17,000. Yeah.
Was down by 17,000.
Yeah.
Was that correct?
As I've said, at all times, the Prime Minister and myself have been consistent about the backlog of the legacy of initial decisions, which predates 28th of June 2022. Those are some of the longer standing claims. Those are They predate the Nationality and Borders Act reforms, and that is the backlog to which the Prime Minister referred in December. That's the backlog we've been focusing on. We are also working on reducing our overall caseload, but that backlog, which stood at 92,000 when the PM stood up and set out our plan, has fallen by 17,000.
But that is different elements of the backlog, not the total backlog. Am I right in thinking that the ministerial code would require you to go back into the House of Commons and correct an infactual statement?
I haven't made any incorrect statement. As I said, I'm repeating myself, but I don't mind doing so at all times. Wonderful. Likewise. At all times, Prime Minister and I have been consistent in our so-called legacy backlog that originally stood at 92,000. As of my announcement a few weeks ago, that has fallen by 17,000. In addition, the overall caseload includes incoming cases which postdate the 28th of June and run up until today. I will never be able to get that number down to zero because there are constantly cases coming in to that caseload. We are also, nonetheless, diverting resource and interventions to ensure that that number falls as well.
Okay, thanks very much. So that is despite the fact that the Home Office themselves are very specific about describing the asylum initial decision backlog and total backlog as two separate entities. But okay, thank you very much. My next question again goes back to something that the Chair said, and we're talking about trafficking for sex, which is a very lucrative business for those who decide to traffic people for sex. But it wouldn't be so lucrative if we didn't have such a demand. So what is your department doing to actually curb demand so we could then in turn curb the practice of trafficking for sex?
That's a great question, and I share your sentiment that it is a horrendous practice and we need to bring an end to it. I'm very proud of our modern slavery regime that brings in new offences which are designed to protect victims of trafficking and exploitation. The Palermo Protocol makes clear that exploitation includes sexual exploitation and prostitution, but it can be incredibly varied. And so we are seeing prosecutions being brought for these offences, whether it's facilitation or putting people into servitude or slavery or forced behaviour. It's also linked to people smuggling, slightly different to trafficking. But again, the Modern Slavery Act includes new offences relating to that.
I'm specifically talking about people who've been trafficked for sex. And the only thing I can find that the department's actually done is proactively is since 2013 and 2020, 3 individuals have actually been summoned and fined for the act of purchasing the sex from a trafficked victim. And I would suggest that that's hardly going to deter people who traffic people for sex, which is, like I said, highly lucrative. So 3 fines of around £100 in 7 years is not going to be much of a deterrent, Home Secretary, is it?
So I think when it comes to dealing with reducing sexual exploitation, tackling the demand, as I've said, I've set out the modern slavery regime. Acts of buying and selling sex are not illegal in England and Wales. However, there are a range of offences, from paying for the services of a sex worker or prostitute subjected to force, to causing, inciting or controlling prostitution for gain. And those are offences under the Sexual Offences Act and the Modern Slavery Act. And we know that criminals can use prostitution and sex work to target and exploit vulnerable people for their own commercial gain. We're working very closely with law enforcement partners to tackle those drivers, and we are developing a cross-agency adult services website action plan to tackle sexual exploitation online and its root cause, which is adult services and the websites associated with those. We are investing extra resource to support the police to build more intelligence on these ASWs to identify risk and vulnerability. And listing the priority offences in the online safety bill will place a duty on the companies to take proactive measures to ensure illegal content which amounts to an offence of human trafficking does not appear on their services, and they must remove it once they're swiftly alerted to it.
The script hadn't anticipated the question, because none of that answered the question, which is why only 3 cases have actually been fined for buying sex from trafficked sex workers in the last 7 years. But thank you for that answer.
Just note there has been a specific operation led by the NCA, Operation ADANT, which has been intensifying the targeting of offenders involved in exploitation to which you refer.
But 3 offences, and that's not going to dent the sex traffickers, I can assure you. Will you make spiking an individual criminal offence?
Well, spiking is an abhorrent crime already. It is, as I say, already illegal under existing legislation such as the Offences Against the Person Act and the Sexual Offences Act. The perpetrators of this kind of behaviour need to be brought to justice. Proper investigations need to be led, and prosecutions need to be successfully brought. We are very keen to explore and work more proactively with the National Police Chiefs Council. I've raised it with Deputy Chief Constable Maggie Blythe, who is the MPCC lead for tackling violence against women and girls. And there has been a reclassification of the drugs which have been historically linked with drink spiking. And there's been extra funding through the Safety of Women at Night and Safer Streets Fund to support initiatives which prevent people from becoming victims of spiking. I recently visited Nottinghamshire Police actually and met their nighttime economy team, and they've got a really good unit which goes out to city centres Friday, Saturday nights, outside clubs, outside bars, and they are ready and waiting to support people who might come and complain of being victims of spiking. What we find is there's a real challenge operationally. So by the time someone realises that they might have been spiked, by the time they get to the police, it's very hard, what we're finding in operation, to prove that the substance is in their system and also to find the perpetrator. So those are where we need to target the efforts, in my view.
Okay, thanks ever so much. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just check whether the Home Office has published its report on the prevalence of spiking and the actions it proposes to take? Have you produced that yet? That was one of the... We produced a report and that was one of the things you said you were going to do.
Minister for Safeguarding wrote to you on the 3rd of April saying that publication would be delayed due to the pre-election period as it was then. We're looking to finalise it. We'll publish it very soon. Very soon. Okay, thank you. And just very finally, do you support the Nordic model for actually tackling demand? Demand in what context? Sorry, for sex. For sex? Yeah, so the Nordic model that's been introduced in Northern Ireland, France, Sweden, do you support that? I'm not familiar with it, so if you explain it, then I will. You could write to me about that. Happy to. Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming, Home Secretary. Now then, we can talk about backlogs all day long, but in my mind, the best way to stop the backlogs is to stop people coming here illegally. So that poses a couple of problems for me. Once we do stop people coming in illegally, we're going to have lots of staff in the Home Office that will no longer be required, because our job will be done in stopping the illegal entry. But the way we stop it, in my mind, is the Rwanda flights. They've got to our returns policy to France or wherever, and that's not going to happen. So Could you give the committee an update of where we are with the Rwanda flights, please?
Yes. Well, we are currently waiting for the Court of Appeal to opine on the appeal hearing. You will know, you will have seen, and I won't reiterate, the scenes that we saw approximately this time last year, isn't it? When the former Home Secretary attempted to put people on a flight and get the flight off to Rwanda. It was thwarted at the last minute, pretty much, by the Strasbourg court. And ever since then, we've been in litigation. And in December, we won the first round of that litigation on the substance of the Rwanda policy, on whether it's lawful or not. And the High Court, in a very strong judgment, endorsed the lawfulness of the policy. That's been challenged by the claimants. A hearing took place at the end of April, and we are awaiting a judgment from the Court of Appeal. But so that is out of my hands. Once we finish and complete the litigation, and assuming we are successful, we will be in a position to for flights to take off.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move away from backlogs and asylum and that sort of stuff and talk about something completely different. A few weeks back, we had Commissioner Rowley in front of the committee, and there was some confusion as to whether or not police can actually stop protesters blocking the roads and moving people on, and making sure that the public can go about their daily business unhindered. Could you please confirm, Home Secretary, whether or not police now have the powers to stop people, stopping the citizens of this country going about their daily business?
I believe they do, particularly after last night, when, and I'm grateful to their lordships, but our new statutory instrument, which clarified the definition of serious disruption, bringing it in line with the Public Order Act 1986, enabling the police to take more robust and swifter action when it comes to slow walkers or those bringing misery and chaos to the law-abiding majority. I believe, yes, they do have the full armoury of legal tools at their disposal.
So you'll be coming down heavy on any chief constables or commissioners that don't see this through?
Well, the police are operationally independent, and therefore, and I respect that, and that's a foundation of our arrangement and our constitution. So any decision that they make about arresting a particular person, intervening in a matter, is for them alone, and I have to respect that. Of course, I am incredibly frustrated when I see scenes of militant activists, selfish protesters disrupt people from getting to work, getting to school, getting to hospital appointments, and we cannot see that. So I have to say, my view is quite mixed. I think that, yes, we want to see a more robust and swifter response from the police, and I think there is room for improvement, personally, going forward. And I think the police have done a very difficult job well. If you look at the coronation, for example, I think protesting of that event, policing of that event, of that scale, of that significance, was a success for the police. I think that it went off unimpeded, and people were able to enjoy that historic event. And that's thanks to incredible hard work and initiative deployed by the police. I think if you look at recent protests relating to Just Stop Oil, the police have invested huge amounts of time and money in responding to these protests. I think it was just in the last 6 weeks alone, there have been 156 or thereabouts events or protest incidents. 13,000 police officer shifts have been used on on policing those protests. There have been hundreds of arrests, and it's cost millions of pounds. So the police are trying. They're trying hard. I believe that they've come to us and asked for greater clarity in the law so that they understand where the threshold sits. I believe we've provided that clarity, and I believe that they now are empowered to respond robustly.
So do you think this will help? For example, we see protesters at HS2 on the where they're developing the tunnels and the tracks, etc. We see protesters tunnelling themselves, being nuisances, and adding hundreds of millions of pounds to the cost of HS2. Is this going to help with that as well?
Well, our new offences contained in the Public Order Act deal with specifically that issue. We've included new offences of tunnelling and locking on, because previously it was felt there was a gap in the law. People might not have been meeting the kind of obstruction of the highway criteria. They might not have been meeting the criminal damage criteria. We created new offences to deal with those scenarios.
And finally, Home Secretary, you've been Home Secretary in your second stint for about 6 or 7 months, I think. What are your main achievements?
Well, I think that there are kind of three groups of ways I think about the work of the Home Secretary. You've got law and order, first of all, migration, and then you've got security. And when it comes to law and order, my focus is more police, less crime, safer streets, and common sense policing. And what have we achieved on my watch? Well, we've delivered record police numbers. Manifesto pledge, Home Office project delivered on time, on budget, record number, highest number ever in the history of policing. Got to pay credit to Rachel, actually. She was the SRO who oversaw delivery of that. We do also have less crime. The Chief Inspector remarked in his State of Policing report last week that actually England and Wales is arguably safer now than it ever has been before, because there's been an overall fall in crime. We've extended the powers for the police to take better action on militant protesters. And ultimately, I want the police to be liberated from needless bureaucracy, hence the Home Office counting rules reforms that I've brought in, which the MPCC estimate will save 400,000 police hours, changes to mental health, so that we're not getting police officers waiting for 9 hours in A&E, chaperoning someone who really should be being met with a health response, and changing the threshold on non-crime hate incidents to protect freedom of speech, as well as enabling people to come in who don't have a degree. I want common sense policing, the police to focus on the basics, the people's priorities, antisocial behaviour, knife crime, to use their stop and search powers, and I want them to restore confidence in themselves amongst the British public. On the boats and on migration, the challenge is to stop the boats. We're not there yet, but we've achieved a lot in introducing a landmark piece of legislation in the illegal migration bill. This goes further than ever before. And I believe that it will be an important element in our mission to stop the boats. And we are seeing some progress already. We've returned over 1,800 people back to Albania who don't have the right to be here. We are intensifying our immigration enforcement raids and interventions. The work on as I say, the backlog, we're rolling out alternative sites so that we can stop using hotels. And then lastly, on security, the fraud strategy we just talked about, but also prevent. I've begun the biggest programme of reform, which is much needed for our prevent programme.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Could I just ask you then, you referred to Albania and returning 1,800 Albanians. Just want to check with you, out of the over 12,000 that came across in small boats last year, and we published a report earlier this week on Albania, just want to check, out of that 12,000 who travelled across last year, how many of those have been returned? So it was over 12, I think it was 12,300 that came across. So how many have you been able to return? Because we have asked for the 1,800 for a breakdown of who these 1,800 are, and we haven't been able to.
So yes, that 1,800 are not all small boat arrivals. I have to be clear about that. That 1,800 is made up of foreign national offenders, people who are returning voluntarily, and some people who came here illegally on small boats. So we've got, I'm very straight about that. have you got the...
No, we don't have that.
We don't have the specific answer to your question.
How many of the Albanians from last year you've been able to return? No.
We don't have that
And is
figure in
this
front of us.
because you're not processing them? They're in the backlog, so none of them would have been dealt with. Is that how it's working?
Well, we've got there are about 12,000, as you say, nationals from Albania who arrived last year. We know that we are increasing the level of returns of Albanians. So there were 795 Albanian nationals were returned in Q1 of this year, January to March 2023, which is 16% of all returns. I think that is an increase on previous years.
They come out of that 12,000 from last year.
It's very difficult to necessarily pinpoint that they arrived in that 12,000 last year. They might have been here in the system longer. So I wouldn't feel confident actually identifying the origins of those people.
Are you able to write to us and to explain to us?
We can look into it.
Okay, thank you. Alison Thewlis.
Thank you very much, Chair. Home Secretary, you and I both have 2 children. What would you do if one of them went missing?
Can I just correct? I'm being told the number is not 1,800, it's 1750. That's the number I'm being told. As of the 1st of June, Albanian nationals returned.
In the first quarter of this year? Is that what you...
No, since the joint communique was signed.
Okay, so
Is
what...
that right? Yes. I'm correcting the 1,800 figure that I gave you.
Oh, right, so it's less.
Okay. That's the...
Or fewer,
that's the
sorry, fewer, and I'm being corrected as well. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Thank
Alison
you.
Thewlis.
Home Secretary, you and I both have 2 children. What would you do if one of them went missing?
Well, I would call the police immediately.
There are, according to an answer to a written question that I had this week, there are still 154 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children still missing who were in a Home Office hotel. What are you doing to find those children?
Well, we are ensuring we use, in terms of unaccompanied asylum-seeking hotels, unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in hotels. We are using hotels to accommodate them because of an unprecedented increase. Our first preference is to ensure that, and I'm going to use a term you ask, obviously with of course due respect to the children, but our first choice, by far the best measure, is to accommodate UASCs in through the local authority in foster care. And we have it's been incredibly difficult to identify sufficient places for those children. However, we were able to get that number down to, let me just get sure that I've got the right.
According to the parliamentary answer I had, it's 154 that remain missing.
Yeah, right. Again, you asked me about this, I think, at the last session. And this is obviously an incredibly serious issue. We've worked very intensively, and we've now got that number down to 0. There are no UASCs accommodated in hotels following an intensive focus led by the Home Office to ensure that all of those children found appropriate foster care in local authorities. I'm very grateful to the local authorities who stepped forward.
With respect, Home Secretary, that's not what I asked. I'm glad that there are no unaccompanied children being kept in hotels because none of them should be in the first place. It's entirely inappropriate that they should be housed in such a way. What I asked is, what are you doing to find the 154 children still unaccounted for?
So any child going missing is extremely serious, and that's why we work very closely, if that case arises, with local authorities and the police to operate a very robust system of missing persons protocols to ensure that the appropriate efforts are put into place to identify where they might be.
Are you aware of the names, the dates of birth of these children that are still missing?
No, I don't know. These would be operational matters for the police. It's not for me to intervene into specific details of cases.
As the Home Secretary,
to do with
your
missing
department
persons.
put these children from where they went missing. I'm asking you if it was your child that had gone missing, as it were, if it were mine, as it were when a child I'd never met in my neighbourhood went missing. The entire neighbourhood was out looking for them. Who is looking for these 154 missing children?
Yeah, well, what I would say is we have actually no power to detain unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in these hotels.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're suggesting, are you suggesting that we detain them in more secure accommodation?
I'm suggesting that you care when 154 of them go missing and have not yet been found.
With respect, it is incredibly difficult generally when it comes to missing persons, if you speak to the police to trace them, it is incredibly challenging to find someone who does not want to be found.
How do you know
but however, we take this issue very seriously. When children who are in the UASC category are notified as having gone missing, we work with the police. Sometimes they are located and they are traced, but they are there is an intensive and quite extensive package of social work support, local authority support, support workers who are specially trained to look after UASCs, who provide the activities and the well-being support that's necessary to protect, to safeguard this particularly vulnerable cohort of people.
You said in your answer that some of them may not want to be found. Is that because they're afraid of being sent to Rwanda or because they're in the hands of traffickers?
You're asking me a hypothetical question that I just simply don't have the answer
You
to.
don't
What
know
we
who
do
children
know
are, you don't
is
know why
when you
they've gone
look at,
missing and you don't know where they are.
we've also got to be really honest about the children, the profile of the children we're dealing with. The vast majority of children are 16 or 17 years old. If they've come here unaccompanied, many of them will. We also get the situation where many adults claim to be children, illegitimately so. 50% of age assessment cases are resolved in the Home Office's favour, i.e. they are actually adults. Let me just give you the profile. We're dealing here with largely 16 to 17-year-old children. They are children. We owe them legal duties. They are, as I say, largely, and as of today, the ones in our care are housed in foster care. That is by far the best form of accommodation to safeguard their needs and their vulnerabilities and to support them. But of those children who have gone missing because they were previously in hotels, there is, of course, a multi-agency missing persons protocol which is mobilised with the police and local authorities to do everything possible to establish their whereabouts.
How long will you keep looking for them?
You'd have to ask the police unless you know, but that is a missing persons protocol which the police apply, and they have to take a judgment based on the intelligence and the facts of a particular case.
It's going to be very difficult to know, isn't it, if they're in the hands of traffickers or if they're running scared of being sent to Rwanda, when you'll actually find them, isn't it?
The Home Office's position is that if you are a UASC and you are in the care of the Home Office, you're encouraged to remain within the accommodation that's being provided and not to run away. You are provided with all of the resources and the services to which you're entitled: schooling, mental health, other well-being support. There is, as I say, an extensive and a package of which I'm very proud, because we've worked hard to build that package to ensure that UASCs are properly supported, and running away is something that I wouldn't encourage or condone.
Well, for children in those circumstances, people in the sector have said that your Rwanda plan has caused such fear in those young people that that's why they're disappearing.
If you want to talk about Rwanda, I mean, the point of Rwanda is a deterrent. We want to stop people coming here on boats in the first place. We want to stop people making this illegal journey in the first place. We want to stop the people smuggling gangs exploiting vulnerable people. We want to stop them putting children on their unseaworthy vessels, travelling late at night without a life jacket, in the vain hope of getting to a life in the United Kingdom. That's why I have every confidence in our Rwanda plan, and that once we are able to operationalise it, we will be able to implement that deterrent, and we will see a fall in the number of people coming here illegally.
That remains to be seen. Would you agree that the system that we have in Scotland, the Scottish Guardianship Service, where young people are supported by Aberlour and the Scottish Refugee Council, who are experts in this area, that would be a much better way of protecting young people and preventing them from disappearing in the way that they have under your care.
Well, I mean, Scotland has a slightly different regime to us. Ultimately, we have a system here whereby, as I say, I'm very proud of the service and the quality of care that we offer unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. They are housed, as of today, and thanks to intensive effort, not in hotels, but in foster care. We worked very hard to find local authorities who were able to provide foster care homes. I'm very grateful to those families who have come forward, those local authorities who have assisted, but those children should be well settled, well supported now as they go through our process.
Okay, no matter how you wouldn't be proud of 154 children still missing, but we'll leave that there. Moving on to the issue of Afghans. I have a number of Afghans in my constituency who are still trying to get their families out of Afghanistan and out of Pakistan. One constituent applied through the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme and put in an expression of interest and he's yet to receive anything back from that process. How many people are still outstanding who've put in an expression of interest?
Are you talking about ARAP?
Yep.
Right.
ARAP Route 3.
Sorry?
There's the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme Pathway 3.
Yep. So, just get my notes. Well, I mean, first of all, let me just say that I'm very proud of what we have done so far on ARAP and ACRS. In total, they provide up to 20,000 places for people affected by events in Afghanistan. There are 3 pathways under ARAP which offer relocation to eligible Afghan citizens who worked for or with the UK government locally in Afghanistan, and that scheme recognises the service of eligible Afghan citizens and the risks arising to them and their dependent family members as a result of their work. So there is, we've granted, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office are working very hard to ensure that we resettle up to 1,500 people in the first stage of Pathway 3. That is a Foreign Office lead, and that is something that they are working on.
My constituent's sister has sent video footage of the Taliban entering her home and assaulting her. How long will she have to wait before she can get to safety in the UK under the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme Pathway 3?
I'm not going to comment on an individual case. Very happy for you to write to relevant minister and we can look into it. But in general terms... They've written to the minister and they have told me that they can't give me a timescale for that. That's why I'm asking you. In terms of the ACRS, we have granted over 9,000 people settled status under that scheme, and we are continuing to welcome individuals under all of the pathways. Ultimately, if someone meets the criteria set out in our Afghan-specific schemes, they will be supported to get here and they will be resettled. Approximately 11,400 people have arrived in the UK through the ARAP scheme. There's a further 3,700 expected to come. There's a huge amount of investment that I am putting into this scheme. £258 million of funding from the Home Office is going into supporting the individuals coming under this scheme. I can't comment on the specific facts of your constituent or the lady about which you're referring to. I'm happy to look into it unless there's something you wanted to add on it.
No, just to say, as the Home Secretary said, that the FCDO who operate Pathway 3 are working through the 1,500 applications under that scheme as quickly as possible.
Thank you. A number of Afghans are still stranded in Pakistan. The Independent reported in April that there was 1,000 at least and 500 children stuck in Pakistan who would be eligible to come here but haven't yet had the paperwork processed. One of my constituents has just contacted me on this just a few minutes ago, still waiting for the Home Office to process the visas for his family who are in Pakistan in a very bad condition, waiting to come here to safety. When will people such as my constituent, Azizullah, see his family?
As I said, under ARAP, we've already...
This isn't under ARAP. This is under family reunion, which is your responsibility.
Family reunion, okay. So if it's under family reunion, there are different rules. That is not the criteria pertaining to ARAP or ACRS do not apply. Family reunion relates to basically whether you've got someone who's a family member of someone who's got refugee status. It generally applies to the spouse or children, but there is also discretion in the circumstances of compelling cases. That will all be determined on its merit. All applications for family reunion, I mean, we've granted 46,000
I have a number of cases
for
where
family
waiting for the
reunion.
VAC in Islamabad to process their documents. Why is that taking so long?
We're actually progressing quite well with our visa applications, and there's been improvement due to extra resource and caseworker deployment. But I mean, there is always a waiting system. If you write to us, we can look into it.
Further to that, I have constituents who have family members in Sudan. I was told by the FCDO during a call that we had that the Home Office was looking at some kind of workaround for documents that we held because people had submitted their passport to the VAC in Sudan prior to the situation as it is kicking off, and then were obviously not able to access those documents because the consular support and all the services there were withdrawn. The Home Office has more recently written to me to say that the documents are in secure storage in the VAC with no idea of how people are supposed to progress those applications. One constituent applied for a spousal visa in February 2022 and is still waiting for a decision in this. Would you accept that the Home Office delays in processing these applications is actually putting lives at risk now?
When it comes to general issuance of visas, we are processing visa applications within our published service standards. We are expecting a summer surge of student applications. We generally encourage people to apply as early as possible, up to 3 months before they travel.
That's not relevant to people in Sudan.
Sorry?
That's not relevant to people in Sudan.
Sudan, sorry, I missed that in the beginning. In terms of Sudan, we've already welcomed people from Sudan. Let me try and get my...
People who have applications in process,
yes,
for whom you hold the paperwork, what are they supposed to do?
Well, we have the Visa Application Centre in Khartoum is closed because of the circumstances in Sudan. And so that is publicly available information. People have been informed of that. It's not safe for customers and staff to attend the Khartoum VAC. They will not be able to collect their documents from the Khartoum VAC or have them sent back to them in Sudan until the VAC is safe to access. I mean, it's a very difficult circumstance. We need to balance the safety of people who are related to the VAC, the safety of the circumstances and the conditions in the country. But UKVI is proactively contacting everybody who's affected, particularly if we've got their passports or if they have been applying, with providing them with the options as to how they can work around this.
Are they able to get digital copies of the documents you hold? And will that be sufficient for them to travel?
Well, it depends. If the Khartoum VAC has had the passport of the individual, what customers are being offered is a letter. They're being offered a letter which confirms that their passport is securely stored at our Visa Application Centre in Khartoum, and a digital copy of their passport, and they can use that in support of travelling out of Sudan. So yes.
Okay. And if people like my constituent whose pregnant wife is in Khartoum, is there any way of further supporting somebody who's pregnant in Khartoum, has family in the UK and can't get that documentation? Because it's very difficult for people in that circumstance to travel and to take the risk of moving across country.
Well, there will be, again, I can't get into the individual circumstances, but as I said, we're always happy to, if you write to the Home Office, and we will look into it.
Okay.
So you're happy to raise these things in writing, and then we can get the Home Secretary to respond. Okay, thank you. Paula Barker.
Thank you. Good morning, Home Secretary, Ms Watson and Mr Hobbs. Can you tell us how many asylum hotels are used at the moment, many new hotels have you opened in the last 6 months, and how many more are you planning to open?
I'm not sure what that noise is.
Not me. No, it's not.
I think it's the fan.
Who's answering this question? I'm just conscious of time, so we do need to keep going.
I don't have the specific number of hotels. You might, Dan.
So you don't know how many hotels are in
I've got the
use?
number of people. It's about 45,000 people.
I know you've got.
in hotels.
I've got people myself.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in the amount of hotels that are in use.
We do have that number because I've looked at the spreadsheet with all the hotels. I think it's in the hundreds.
So can
but
you write
I don't have the specific number.
Can you write to the committee with those numbers,
Sure.
please?
Yeah.
And how many have opened in the last 6 months, and how many more are you planning to open?
We can
There was
do
a
that.
press release from the Home Office on the 5th of June regarding 2 additional barges, saying that this could reduce the need to source an additional 90 hotels. So were you actually planning an additional 90 hotels?
Well, we are because we are meeting increasing demand. We are constantly trying to source accommodation
But
for incoming arrivals.
In the
that
press
inevitably
release-
means the use of hotels. So we are still using hotels as of today. Yes.
So you were planning an additional 90 hotels?
We are doing everything according to the need, and we are demand led. So we are bringing on, as I said, we've got 45,000 or thereabouts in hotels at the moment. That's an unacceptable situation, not just for cost, but also it's actually inappropriate and unfair on the asylum seeker to be living in a hotel. What we are aiming to deliver and we're moving towards is a system of more appropriate, bespoke, much more cost-effective accommodation for asylum seekers. The barge that we announced is one such example, as is repurposing sites like RAF Scampton and Wethersfield.
So on the 5th of June, the press release said there was an additional 2 barges sourced, and that could reduce the need to source an additional 90 hotels. On the 10th of June, it was confirmed that the barge that was due to go on Merseyside has been scrapped. So is the need that was put in your press release on the 5th of 90 hotels, is the Liverpool barge being scrapped going to increase the use of hotels significantly?
Any time that a site that we are aiming to procure for asylum accommodation fails to go ahead, we are inevitably going to have to use hotels. So the challenge for us as MPs is that, I've lost count of the number of MPs who've spoken to me about not wanting a barge in their constituency or not wanting student accommodation to be used or hotels to be used. I very much understand the concerns that they have. The alternative is hotels. So we all have a choice, and it is really about whether we want to move away from the use of hotels or whether we want to keep using hotels. And this government wants to move away and reduce dependency on hotels. That means we need to increase alternative sources of accommodation. That includes barges, that includes the new sites, it includes local authority dispersed accommodation. The more we can maximise those sources of accommodation, the more we can close hotels.
So let's just go with the assumption for a second that the press release on the 5th of June from the Home Office was indeed accurate, and you were saying that the barges would reduce the need for an additional 90 hotels. So there's currently 108,000 people in asylum accommodation approximately, 47,000 in hotels. So if you needed an additional 90 hotels, how many more people are you looking to house in hotels on top of the 47,000
Yes, there
that are
were
already there?
over 1,000 arrivals this weekend. They will have to go to a hotel.
But I'm assuming that you have a strategy and a plan.
it's not binary, and with respect, you're oversimplifying the situation. We've got a community of people in hotels. Our aim is, and we've got people incoming. That's why we've been working intensively, at pace, energetically, to find alternative sources of accommodation and reduce our dependency on hotels. That takes time. We've been able to announce the first batch of sites. Those will be delivered very soon, and we will be seeing asylum seekers relocated to those sites in the next few months. Once we're able to ramp that up, keep going with that, do more sites, and we're working on many other options around the country, we will, I'm confident. And once we are able to implement our bill and Rwanda flights and stop the inflow of people, I believe we will then be in a position ultimately where we can reduce our dependency on hotels. That's the goal.
Well, let's
but
turn
it takes time to get there. It's not put a barge on, stop hotels.
Let's turn our attention
as well.
to the bill. So is it correct that clause 9 of the illegal immigration bill means that you will still need to provide taxpayer-funded asylum accommodation for people who have arrived in the UK and have not yet been returned anywhere?
Let me just see what clause 9 in particular are you referring to clause 9? There's many subsections there.
Clause 9 of the illegal immigration bill.
Right. Are you talking about clause 8?
No, clause 9.
Where it's about where an asylum claim is admissible?
No, clause 9.
Right, okay. Well, aspects of clause 9 work with clause 2 to place a duty on Secretary of State to make arrangements for removal from the UK as soon as reasonably practicable of those who are here illegally as of the 7th of March and have not come directly from a safe country. The duty to make arrangements for the removal applies irrespective of the claim that someone will have put in, and there is a duty, and we need to. That is the way we're going to stop the boats. This kind of element in the framework set up by the illegal migration bill is absolutely essential if we are to inject an element of deterrence in our system, greater robustness in our immigration laws, and ensure that people stop making the journey in the first place.
So given the fact that you still need to provide taxpayer-funded asylum accommodation and haven't yet been returned, how many places are you planning for this year and next as a result of the bill?
Well, as I said, we are working incredibly hard. I don't know how many different ways I can say it, but it's the same thing that I've already repeated. We are working to procure as many alternative sources of accommodation as possible. There's no limit.
No, I understand that, Home Secretary, but what I'm trying to guess is,
to hotels
what I
that we are
don't
working
accept is that you don't have any forward planning strategy that would give you any sort of indication of how many places you were planning for.
Well, of course, we can see we've got reasonable worst case scenarios.
So
what we expect the number.
So what's the number then in your worst case scenario?
Expecting this year. Well, I think that number was published at the end of last year. I think it's about 65,000 people as a reasonable worst case scenario in terms of number of arrivals for this year.
So how many will be housed in taxpayer-funded accommodation because you haven't returned them this year in your worst case scenario, and next year in your worst case scenario?
The solution to the problem. I mean, we both agree on the problem.
I know what you believe the solution is, Home Secretary. That's not my question.
Well, your question is slightly tautologous with respect. I mean, I'm telling you our plan to solve the very problem that you're talking about, which is unprecedented numbers of people coming into the country illegally, costing the taxpayer £6 million a day, forcing 45,000 people to be housed in hotels. We're both frustrated. Well, I am at least frustrated with that situation. I'm not sure if you are actually.
Well, I was frustrated when you tried to put them in
is stop the use of hotels. That's why we're working very hard to identify and deliver alternative sites. Ultimately, I'm very confident combining our deterrence in the illegal migration bill, flights to Rwanda, extra accommodation, which is not hotels, we will be able to bear down on the number of people currently accommodated in hotels, which is at an unacceptable level.
Okay, let's try this question. The bill says everyone who arrived after March 2023 won't be eligible for an asylum decision, and you've said that everyone will be detained and deported. So that's already over 5,000 people, and this has increased by over 1,000 already in this week alone. So assuming that the bill actually goes through by the summer recess, do you have an estimate about how many people will be immediately covered by the bill provisions, and where will those people then go?
We are currently working very hard to ensure that we are in a position to operationalise the bill, and we are working to deliver more detention places. We need to ensure that the new sites are brought forward. This includes developing a new immigration removal centre in Oxfordshire on the former site of Campsfield House, and a new immigration removal centre at Gosport, Hampshire, on the former site of Haslar. We need to ensure that there is sufficient detention capacity to support the measures in the bill.
So my final question, Chair, please, is what's the contingency plan if you can't deport these individuals? Will they stay permanently in asylum accommodation, and how many additional places in that respect are you planning for?
Again, it's not the case that we need to provide suddenly 60,000 new detention places. No one is proposing that. No one is working to that objective. We believe that deterrence is an important factor in this new framework. And once we are able to relocate people from the United Kingdom to Rwanda or another safe country, we will see a drop-off in the number of people coming and a reduction in the pressure being put on our accommodation, estate and our detention capacity. That is, in many respects, how the Australian model bore out. Once they were able to put on flights to another territory, the number, in a pretty short space of time, of people coming on the boats to Australia fell pretty dramatically. So I think, no one, and I'm not certainly suggesting we are in the process of building 60,000 new detention beds, no. But we are increasing our detention capacity, as I just set out.
Thank you. Thank you. Tim Lawton.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome back, Home Secretary. Can I just return to the issue of the numbers and the backlog? Because to get it absolutely clear, my understanding, I think, is the case then, that the Prime Minister said he would clear the 92,000-ish legacy backlog, which I understand what that is, by the end of this year. And so far, I think up to last month, it's 17,000 of those that have been cleared, leaving approximately 75,000 very roughly. That's the case, isn't it, I think, to make it clear?
Yes, it's down 17,000.
Okay, so last month, 2,440 legacy backlog case decisions were made, and that was down 1,000 on the previous month. So on my very rough calculations, in order to succeed with that undertaking to clear the backlog by the end of the year, 10,630 decisions will have to be made every month for the rest of the year, which is more than 4 times what was taking place last month. Even with your increase in caseworkers, which is not 4 times, and an increase in productivity, which is unlikely to be 2 or 3 times, you're not going to make that target, are you?
I'm not as pessimistic as you are. I believe that, yes, the pace, if you maintained the current pace, we wouldn't meet the target. However, that's to overlook the fact that we will have our full cohort of decision makers later this year. They will be fully trained up and more proficient, and the other measures that we've put into place to speed up the process will be fully bedded in. So in a way, we expect the rate of decision making and the productivity to increase towards the end of our mission. In the way it's a kind of, if you will, a slower start, aiming at accelerating. And some of those measures are very tangible. Whether it is, we've talked about the actual number of decision makers, we've still yet to increase that number, but the benefits of the streamlined asylum processing, the increases to the improvements to the productivity through the changes to the interview process and the simpler guidance, all of that will bed in.
But you've just made it even more of a challenge, because you're saying that the 10,630, which I've said is what you'll have to reach per month, which I don't think you're disagreeing with, you're not going to get anywhere like that in the next few months, which means that for the final months of the year, when you have got these new people in place, the monthly figure is going to have to be substantially more than 10,630. So we're not talking about quadrupling the number of people in place. We're not talking about quadrupling the productivity of the existing people in place, which would be another way of doing it. We're talking about substantially more than that in order to achieve the target. That is not realistic, is it?
There will need to be a substantial increase in productivity and output. I agree with that. I believe we've put in place the measures and the processes now. All of that takes time, to actually put into place
you have a time limit,
the streamlined asylum process.
You have set the target at the end of this year. I'm not saying it cannot be achieved ultimately by increasing productivity and staff. Hopefully, at some stage it can, because it's a finite number. But on those figures I've given you, it's going to be substantially more than quadrupling productivity or bums on seats, as you put it, and that's not going to happen, is it?
I'm not as pessimistic as you.
Well, I'm not being pessimistic. I'm just looking at the figures and any reasonable prediction of how those figures are going to pan out. And I think most people, however gloomster or optimistic they may be, would question that target is going to be achieved by the end of this year.
As I said, those numbers, out retrospectively, in a way, they are not benefiting so much from the changes to the processing. And I think when you combine the extra number of people, which will be a doubling at least of the decision makers, the impacts of the streamlined asylum process, the changes to the initial the kind of the way decisions are made, I believe there will be a substantial uptick in the rate and the progress. You'll have to call. You will call me back, I'm
not
sure.
Not sufficiently. Okay, just to come back to another thing you said, and I should declare an interest as I chair the safeguarding board of a fostering group. You've said there are currently 45,000 asylum seekers in hotels, roughly, and you said there is not a single unaccompanied child asylum seeker in any of those hotels. Are you sure?
Right, so this came up at the last select committee.
About 30 minutes ago, you've just said that.
No, but it first came up when we talked about it at length at the last select committee meeting. And after that, we've taken extensive measures to identify, it was about 100 or so children in that region at the time who were unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in hotels that we were, who were in hotels, and we wanted to work to ensure that they were no longer in hotels. I haven't looked at it in the last few days, but as of last week, that number was 0, because I did provide a concerted effort to ensure that foster care was provided. We worked very intensively. We went out to local authorities.
Okay, no, that's fine. If
we
you're
wanted them
sure
to
with
come
that figure,
forward.
that figure is
that was my
encouraging.
assurance. That's what officials have given me as of last week.
Okay, so looking...
Can I just confirm with the officials?
So just to confirm, the Home Secretary is right, and the figure that we had as of last week was there were no unaccompanied children in hotels. Obviously, as the Home Secretary already spoke about, there have been arrivals in the last few days, so that position may have changed. So just to be clear to the committee, as of last week, there were no children in Home Office
so children
hotels.
can still be put in hotels?
So in extremis, when there is no availability in local authorities, there is no other option in order to safeguard those children, provide them accommodation, for the Home Office to do anything but put them in the best accommodation that we can find for them, which may well be a bespoke UASC hotel with the necessary support work and recording of their entry and exit that goes with that. But if there is no local authority who is able to take a child, we have no other option but to provide for
Well, you
them.
have an option of commissioning a children's home, residential care, for example.
So currently our only option is to use the hotels. In the illegal migration bill, you'll be aware that we have taken, or the plan is to take new powers for the government to accommodate unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. But at the moment, our only ability when local authorities are unable to accommodate children is to provide bespoke hotels with safeguarding.
So you have no
support.
ability to directly commission an independent residential children's home to accommodate unaccompanied asylum-seeking children if foster care is not available.
So the ability to accommodate asylum-seeking children, there is further powers being taken in the illegal migration
Yeah, I'm
bill.
talking about now.
Under currently, then the Children's Act, it places the obligation on local authorities to accommodate children in their area who are otherwise
Right.
unaccompanied.
So that brings me on to the next question. So in the new powers within the Illegal Immigration Act, then, you will be having to amend the Children Act 1989.
I don't think it's planned.
No, I don't think that is provided for.
Okay,
in the bill.
so that doesn't make sense. So Mr. Hobbs has just said that under the current provisions, under the Children Act, which is what you have to deal with unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, they are the responsibility of local authorities. Hence, you're relying on local authorities to provide those foster places. That's what the Children Act said. I think we can all agree on that, 1989. Under the new bill, you are now saying that you will have the ability for the government directly to take responsibility for those children in unaccompanied asylum-seeking accommodation, in secure accommodation, which is contrary to the provisions of the Children Act. So therefore, either the illegal migration bill is breaking the provisions of the Children Act, or you're going to have to amend the Children Act. Which is it going to be?
So to clarify, if I may, so the power is to be able to accommodate. The statutory powers of corporate parenting remain as per the Children's Act with local authorities. So it is the power to accommodate. It is not, the Home Office is not a body for corporate parental responsibility.
That doesn't answer my question.
So the corporate parenting responsibility remains with the local authority.
Yes.
As per the Children's Act. Our power is to provide accommodation for.
So will local
under the
authorities
sexual
be putting them in secure accommodation?
I don't know whether they'll be putting them in secure accommodation.
Well, if under the
Secretary,
terms of the bill they are going to be in secure accommodation, which as it stands, notwithstanding the undertaking given by the Immigration Minister, they can be in secure accommodation for up to 27 days.
it's for the, so that separate regime, that's detention, which is used in very rare and limited circumstances. The power in the bill is to provide accommodation for unaccompanied asylum-seeking
but
children.
in the bill, the government will have the power to put unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in detention, in secure accommodation, for, as it stands on the face of the bill, for the same length of time as adults, which is 28 days. But given that the Immigration Minister gave an undertaking, it will be less than that. At the outset, it could be up to 27 days.
That's for the purpose of removal.
If I may say, we already have the powers in law to detain children at the border and for the purpose of removal. So that is already a settled position. It's really important that we don't create incentives for the people smuggling gangs to target unaccompanied asylum-seeking children or family groups. That's an important factor in this discussion. So there won't be a requirement to make arrangements to remove an unaccompanied asylum child from the UK until they turn 18. But there is a power to do so, so there'll be a discretion in addition to an accompanying power to detain.
I'm not talking about deporting them, I'm talking about how they are accommodated. And one of the problems...
Those will be, the powers of detention of unaccompanied children will be very limited and will be set out in regulations, such as for the purposes of family reunion or where removal is to a safe country.
We know that, but we don't know the details of how that's going to work. What we also know is you've got a problem over age verification, and part of this issue is because at the moment it's taking 6 weeks to commit a not 100% foolproof age verification on somebody claiming to be over 18 who isn't. Have you made any progress in reducing that? Because if not, 6 weeks is longer than 28 days.
Well, we are bringing into this section.
It was quite a big issue raised during the passage of the bill, so hopefully there's been quite an initiative. You gave the phrase just now, Home Secretary, that you are working very hard to operationalise the bill. I wouldn't expect anything else. This is an area you're going to have to work particularly hard to operationalise how you deal with children without detaining them, contrary to existing welfare legislation for children, for the same amount of time as adults. Why do we not know if you've made any progress on age verification?
Well, we are... we're reforming how we resolve age disputes through the introduction of the Nationality Age Assessment Board, and that started on the 31st of March of this year. And that consists of expert social workers. Their primary task is to conduct age assessments upon referral from a local authority or the Home Office. It's initially focused on targeted areas where there are particular pressures. This is a very serious issue because ultimately if there's a child who is in the presence of an over 18 individual who is being treated as a child, that is a safeguarding risk. We have had the age estimation Science Advisory Committee, which was set up in December 2021 to provide independent advice
so they had
to
lots
us
of
on the
time
scientific
to get it
methods.
to below 6 weeks.
They provided a report earlier this year. We're considering the recommendations in that report, but we are making progress in terms of how we are considering age assessments. There are a lot of challenges with this.
I think we all know there's lots of challenges. That came out in the bill. It's a really, really urgent issue. I understand absolutely why the government may need to retain some powers to detain children who may abscond, and there are circumstances. But absolutely key to that is having an age verification system that actually works and doesn't take 6 weeks. It doesn't take 6 weeks in other countries to do it. Everything you've said so far is everything that the Minister was able to say during the passage of the bill. Nothing seems to have changed. Can I touch on a couple of other separate
the upshot
issues?
is we are bringing in the reforms of the NABA
but you don't
on
know.
age assessment. That takes time. We've got to resource that. It's not going to happen overnight.
And
then
we're
also
want this bill to
further
come
steps.
in. You want this bill to take effect before the summer recess. That's weeks away, and you don't know how you're going to improve age verification.
I haven't said I want this bill to take effect before the summer recess.
Well, that's the government's ambition is to have it in force before the summer recess.
Well,
is it
commencement happens after a bill securing royal assent.
And
so
you want it to commence as soon as possible for all the reasons we've already discussed, in order to deter people.
We are bringing
in order
in
to clear the
reforms to age
backlog without
assessment.
adding to it.
We are bringing in the reforms in the NABA to age assessment. That does take time. And we are also, we've included provisions in the illegal migration bill on age assessment, precisely to avoid the lengthy disputes to which you refer. That can protract the experience, it can prevent removal of those who are assessed to be adults, and we need to ensure that there is a speedier turnaround and much more robust age assessment in the system.
I agree with that, but we don't know how. On another issue, the French police have been intercepting more migrants before they get into the water. They still won't intercept them once they're in the water beyond thigh depth, I think we ascertained when we went there. And they've now intercepted, I think, something like 54% of the attempts, which is progress, helped by the £500 million subsidy of the French police force that the British taxpayer is giving. How many of those have actually been detained rather than allowed to go free in France by the French police? Has there been any concomitant increase in the number of attempted boat crossings who are then actually detained rather than just allowed to go free and return to the same beach the following night?
Well, last year the French prevented crossings which were carrying over 33,000 illegal migrants. That's an increase of 40% on the previous year. So they are preventing departures. They've also carried out arrests and prosecutions of their own. I don't think I've got that specific figure of French.
It's not many, is it?
Prosecutions. Don't know if you do. No.
Okay, so we are paying £500 million to the French police in order to do more interceptions, which is delaying people to come across, but we don't know if it's actually leading to them being arrested and their status in France analysed and then dealt with appropriately. I mean, the point is that they're just trying again, and they only have to get lucky once. So have we not put some conditions on that 500 million? They've actually got to prevent people from keep trying, and you only do that by detaining them and analysing what their status is in France itself and whether they should be in France, let alone able to come to the UK.
In the first 2 months of this year, over 3,700 crossings were prevented. The interception rate is one that we monitor closely, sits at around 50%.
54%, even better.
There we go. That we need that to increase. The French and we all agree on that. That's why we've put in more resource. That's why we're working more closely with the French. In terms of outcomes,
could be fewer people.
The French have destroyed over 1,000 small boats last year. Our intelligence cell, we've got a UK-France joint intelligence cell.
I know all that, and all that is good. But what I'm saying is, you do agree that 54% of interceptions could mean fewer different people intercepted.
There have been 400 arrests of people smugglers, and there have been 76 organised crime groups dismantled since the setup of the Joint Intelligence Cell.
Okay, but you do agree that that 54% figure could actually mean fewer different people have been intercepted? Because it's the same people, isn't it, trying again?
It is measured by the number of the proportion of people who don't make it across compared to the total number who make it across in any one session.
Final question. The Joint Inspector of Borders has invited us to accompany him on an inspection of one of the facilities for which he's responsible. Would you have any problem with this committee going with him?
Would depend which facility, and I'd have to...
Well, in principle, would you have any problem with us accompanying him to see how he does his work? Given that we have...
Instinctively, no. I don't know whether there's any proprietary or procedural issue, which I'm not aware of, but can't see any issue unless there is.
So
Let me review that and get back to you.
You would be perfectly happy if we were to go with the inspector to see how he does his work?
Well, you visited Manston, didn't you? Did you visit with the inspector?
No.
Have you ever visited with the inspector?
No, we haven't been able to visit with the inspector. We'd quite like to, so that we're both looking at the same things and seeing how he comes to his conclusions. It would just be very helpful to this committee, but we need permission from the Home Office to do that, and we can't see why the Home Office wouldn't want us to be able to do that.
I haven't considered this issue before. I want to look into it in detail. If it's appropriate, I'm happy to permit it if I have the power to permit it.
Apparently it's been considered by the Home Office, but it's taking rather a long time, so could you perhaps expedite it? Because if you can't come up with any obvious problems for it today, then clearly we need to get on with it, because there's lots for us to do.
I will go. I've not come across this issue, so I will look into it and get back to you.
Have we got time for one final?
Yes, but I'm sure the Home Secretary needs to prepare for
I'm just worried that Ms Watson hasn't had an opportunity to contribute.
This is what happened last time.
And she is the Director for Policing. So why are there 6 police forces in the engage process at the most extreme form of monitoring?
Well, I will start off, and Rachel, you might
the opportunity to hear from one of your colleagues rather than you have to do all the work, Home Secretary. I'm giving you a breather.
Well, I would like to start, because I am the responsible minister, so it is my responsibility. I mean, the inspectorate is, the chief inspector is someone whose work I value greatly. We have a good relationship, and his recent report last week puts down some real challenges for policing as a whole. I do note that he does say that overall crime is falling, and there's never been a safer time to live, arguably, in England and Wales. So I take comfort from his observations in that regard. But you're right, there are several forces which are in the engage process. And that has been, those are, the inspectorate escalates a force into engage when there have been significant or enduring concerns over their ability to address serious underperformance.
We know the process. Why?
I would say, at the end of the day, chief constables and PCCs are, ultimately PCCs are responsible for on-the-ground performance of those forces, how they deploy, how they respond, and whether public confidence is high. We need to ensure that those forces once they're in engage, they are presented with an improvement plan, and there's a considerable level of oversight, accountability and challenge that's injected into those forces. What I am encouraged by is that system does work, and we've seen forces go into engage and then come out of engage. Greater Manchester Police is a great example of one such force which was put into special measures, a new chief was appointed, and there was a real and quite dramatic turnaround. I believe we can see that, and from my updates from the Chief Inspector, he has some grounds for optimism about some of these forces coming out of engage in the not too distant future.
Okay,
Rachel,
I'm very conscious of time, so if you could agree.
I'll be very brief. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Absolutely reiterate the points made by the Home Secretary. The Inspectorate now does a more continual monitoring of forces' performance. Although the inspection reports come out on a periodic basis, it does a periodic monitoring of forces' performance, and we do have a much better insight and oversight than ever before into how forces are doing, which means when a force starts to fall short, and to a degree that is of real concern to the Inspectorate, it's put into engage very, very swiftly. And as the Home Secretary has said, the engage process is one which is designed not to be punitive but to improve performance, and we've seen that. We've seen Greater Manchester come out, we've seen improvements in Cleveland's performance as it's been in the engage process, and it's one that allows the Home Office, along with the Inspectorate and other parts of the policing system, to keep that force, support that force, and keep it under closer observation while it improves.
I would add South Yorkshire and Humberside as forces which have been really shown marked improvement.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm just very, very conscious of your time, Home Secretary, so I've just got just a few very quick questions I just want to put to you. When are we going to see the police regulations to get rid of bad cops that have been requested by the Commissioner of the Met? When are those regulations coming forward?
Are you talking about dismissals?
Yes,
review?
to get rid of bad cops. Yeah.
Well, I launched the review because Sir Mark Rowley and other chiefs have raised concerns with me. We've completed the consultation, the review. We're now considering options very soon. Very soon, before the summer recess? That would be my aim, but I'm only going to say very soon at the moment, because... Anything you want to say?
I think we'd be in a position to make an announcement, of course, the announcement of what exactly that would, what the measures will look like, and then regulations would have to follow. There's, of course, as you know, a process for agreeing.
I'm just trying to work out when you're going to make an announcement to Parliament about what you're going to do about this. So it's not going to be before the summer? Yeah.
Very soon. I'm afraid I can't give more detail than that.
When will you be bringing in the provisions within the Public Order Bill in relation to journalists and buffer zones?
I believe the provision relating to journalists is going to be on the 2nd of July. Buffer zones is going to take a little bit longer. I don't have a precise date to hand for that, but we will certainly let you know.
Could you write to me about that?
Absolutely.
And explain why it's taking longer? When excuse me, when will this committee receive an apology for the behaviour of Lord Murray, who appeared before us to discuss Windrush, was late, was rude, was obstructive, and I've never had an apology about his behaviour?
That's the first I've heard of it.
Well, I wrote to you about it, and I made it very clear that his behaviour was unacceptable. And I've not had a response to my particular concerns.
When did you write? What's the date of your letter?
I can send you the letter again, but
yes,
I wrote
please.
And specifically raised his behaviour with this committee.
I will look into it.
Thank you very much. And then finally, I've just checked the phrase that you used in the Commons, which Caroline Harris was referring to, about the backlog and about it being reduced. You said, and I quote, "Asylum initial decision backlog is down by 17,000. So the Home Office definition of asylum initial backlog is total backlog, including legacy and flow. So I think you just need to reflect on what you said to the House of Commons.
You're also kind of picking and choosing. If you complete
quoting
the whole of that phrase and that sentence, I refer to the legacy within that same sentence in my statement.
Well, I'm quoting.
I'm making it clear, if there's any doubt, at all times I have been referring to, as the Prime Minister has, to the pre-28th of June 2022 initial decision backlog of legacy cases, also known as the legacy
I've just checked
backlog.
the quote.
That is what I have been referring to. 92,000 in December, down by 17,000.
I understand.
I think we've probably ad nauseum gone over that issue, and it's precisely what I meant and what I said.
Well, I just think
I want to clarify, if anyone is willfully or otherwise misinterpreting what I've said, at all times I've been consistent about the reference to the backlog.
I don't think anybody is wanting to do that. All I am asking you to do is to reflect on what is in Hansard and what it says, and that seems to be different to what the Home Office's definition is. So I've just asked you to reflect on that, because we know there's been lots of concern about the use of numbers, statistics coming from the Home Office. So we want to all get this right. We want to all make sure that the facts that we give are correct. So I would just ask you to reflect.
And with respect, you've asked me this question, possibly approaching double figures, 10 times or something like that. We've not been able to talk about the large amount of work on policing and crime yet again, like the last session.
Well,
you've just
like
acknowledged yourself, but yet you've repeated the same question several times. With respect, I've repeated the answer, and I think that actually, I've made the point.
Okay, Home
There's not
Secretary.
much more I can say.
I think with the greatest respect, it is down to this committee to choose the questions we wish to ask you. We are very grateful for your time today, and you've spent more than the 2 hours that you'd allocated, so we're very grateful for that. You're absolutely right, we haven't been able to cover many issues that we would like to explore with you. So this is an open invitation. If you'd like to come back, we would very happily have a session with you on policing alone, because since you came last time in November, we've had the Dame Louise Casey report, we've had the David Carrott case, which was shocking.
Unfortunately, you haven't asked me many questions on those very serious issues.
We would very much like to ask you, so if you'd like to come back, we can make arrangements to sit specially to have a session with you.
We'll look at my diary before I make any
Good.
commitments, but what I would say is asking questions again and again and again, the same questions repetitively, is not the best use of your time. I humbly suggest to you.
Well, I would respectfully say to you, Home Secretary, that we decide what we wish to ask you and how many times we need to ask you to get an answer. So thank you very much for your time today. We look forward to seeing you again, hopefully shortly, so we can discuss with you policing issues and many other issues as well. But thank you for your time. Thank you to the officials as well. Thank you.